Okay, why don't we get started? It's a real honor and pleasure today to introduce Professor Patricia Wilson, who will be talking about her new book, Part of Community Engagement, Practitioner Stories from Around the World.
Oh yeah, I forgot to bring one. And I was going to read from it.
I thought there was a book signing.
Does anybody happen to have one?
Anyway, Patricia and I have been together for a long time, together as colleagues here at CRP. And planning, 70s or 80s, sort of dawned on the planning profession that a central role of planning has to be really studying, analyzing, communicating with, and getting insights and information from residents of the communities where we were working in. Maybe a little bit embarrassing. But, and so there was this, kind of understanding, discussion that we need to be a, discipline involved in community action. And Patricia, for the last 30 plus years, I suppose, has really been a pioneer in developing and learning from the actual processes and techniques of community engagement and working with communities. And the book is, I guess, culmination of the insights from the work that she's done in Austin, in South Africa, from around the world. She really is, a recognized leader in this field. So it's really terrific to have the opportunity to kind of hear the insights she's developed through this work.
Well, thank you, Michael. Gosh, that was the nicest intro I've I've heard from you. So I want to find out who's in the room. How many of you are graduate students in planning? All right. And that's not everybody. I know we have at least one visiting alum. Two. And any other students from School of Architecture? All right, welcome. And students from outside of architecture? Welcome. So, we're going to learn something about a part of community engagement that we generally do not learn in a classroom. It's the secrets. And I'm going to start out with the font of secrets, and that is, these secrets came from merely 2,500 years ago about how to do community engagement well. And it was a Chinese philosopher and leader named Lao Tzu. And here is a summary. We're going to read it carefully of his insights. See what you take away from it. Go to the people. Live with them. Love them. Work with them. Learn from them. Start from where they are. Build on what they have. When the work is done, the people will say, "We have done it ourselves." So these fundamental insights are still true today. But I wanted to update the stories about it and put it in a postmodern context and give it some postmodern concepts and methods to guide our way into the wisdom of Lao Tzu. So that's what this book does. It brings insights from today's change makers, people who learn from experience how to apply these basic teachings from Lao Tzu, even in the most ecologically and socially vulnerable communities. So I take the reader to a shanty town in South Africa, a rural community in India, a violence-plagued valley in Colombia, a colonia on the South Texas border, and more. I show how change makers are scaling up their work to a global level. And each successive narrative in the book adds a deeper awareness of the inner practice. I call it the inner practice of community engagement. That's the stuff you don't usually get in a classroom. The key to systems change is not just the actions we take. It's who we are being while we are doing. And I call this ensemble awareness. This awareness of self and system that is so necessary to be an effective practitioner, an effective change agent when you're working with communities. And I want to mention that community engagement is something that many, many professional fields do. I mean, it's hard to avoid. So the question is doing it well. And that's what this book is about. So what is ensemble awareness? It is a term from choral music. Any choral singers here? Yeah. So you know that term. Any jazz players here? You know, so you know what ensemble awareness is. It is your attunement to that larger whole, to see what is needed at the moment, and your ability to play that role. That's very different from the attitude of an outside consultant who comes in with a series of solutions and tools that he or she is known for and wants to apply them. Have hammer in looking for nail. In ensemble awareness, you are focusing your attention on the needs of the whole and seeing how you can bring out the best of that whole. And so this is, so in choral music training, they call that sing with your ear. In other words, listen to what's needed. That is number one. And adjust accordingly. Find out what will bring out the best. So in what ensemble awareness wraps together then is the concepts of systems thinking, systems awareness, collaborative action, something we use as planners and engaged practitioners, and it also adds in self-awareness, awareness of ourself in action. How are we being while we are doing? Now there is a methodology that is used in this book. It's the methodology of the stories. It is the methodology that I use in the field. It is the methodology that the practitioners who I highlight used in the field. Participatory action research is not a study of a system or a community, as though they were an object of study. Participatory action research is engaged presence, engaged action, and learning from doing with the community. So the idea of that you can know a system by observing it is really only a partial view. You can only know a system if you become engaged with it. And that's how you learn what's possible, what is the potential for a system, and where are the leverage points for change. It's from getting in there and working in the system. So that is the nature of participatory action research. It's done not as an individual, but in a collective. And then where does this fit in the modern day or postmodern day theoretical literature? This fits in the literature on the reflective practitioner. And this literature has developed over the years. It provided the huge insight into systems thinking actually a few decades ago, defining systems thinking as a system out there. And that instead of doing what's called single loop learning, which is, hey, we've got a problem, it reminds me of a problem we had before, we did this to solve it then, let's do that now. So instead of wondering why those old fixes don't work, double loop learning was an attempt to look at issues or problems systemically, to see that our very solutions often exacerbated the problems we were trying to solve. So that's the double loop learning, a huge contribution from the field, and a lot of that contribution was made in planning. The new frontier in reflective practice is triple loop learning. And what is triple loop learning? Well, this is understanding that goes beyond the cognitive domain of double loop learning. Double loop learning questions our mental models. Triple loop learning is the capacity to reflect on one's own interior state of being, the condition of the self, the being that one experiences while doing. Triple loop learning is not a deeper level of cognitive inquiry. It is something else. It is a different kind of learning, a different kind of knowing that is embodied and heartfelt. How often do we get to that in the classroom? This kind of learning can cut to the heart of one's sense of self, as Bateson pointed out. This triple loop learning lies in the subjective domain of the reflective practitioner. Regenerative practice questions the very ground of the practitioner's being, identity, positionality, and purpose. Using triple loop learning, the regenerative practitioner seeks the vitality in a living system. Senses what is possible. Senses what the field is wanting and seeks to realize, to make real that highest potential, that highest possibility. So that is the idea of triple loop learning. It is the idea of ensemble awareness. Let me introduce you to some of the protagonists of this book, the practitioners whose stories I followed. I was either a witness, these are first-hand stories, so I was either a witness of their work or a participant in their work. This is David, who learned his organizing skills working for Cesar Chavez with the farm workers in California, but he came to Texas to work in the colonias, and he found himself in a new arena, doing community engagement as opposed to farm worker mobilization. So he learned the hard way how to work with the community and not impose his values, but work with their values. And so he learned to start out with what they were interested in, They wanted to learn English, and they wanted upward mobility. So he worked on bilingual programs. He worked on citizenship programs before ever addressing the further community organizing. He was building relationship. Here is Nancy Dominguez in Colombia. She is an amazing individual who grew up in a low-income area outside Cali, Colombia, the daughter of a shoe repairman, and with her 8 siblings. She was the first in her family to go to college. And she took her passion for change to the field of social development, social and economic development. And in the story in the book, we see her engaging with rural communities in the Cauca Valley during a time of drug cartels and violence, and breaking through the barriers of fear and mistrust to reawaken relationship and intimacy within that community and among communities. We see Patricia engaged in El Salvador after the Civil War, thinking that she had gone down there to do a project for USAID to show how USAID was so wrong. And discovering that there was another sense of purpose that was calling her as she talked to stakeholders on all sides of the issue. There was no one that was wrong. They all had their experiences, and what they most needed was healing, coming back together, reknitting a social fabric to go on with life. And so she had quite a transformation in letting go and taking on what was needed. This is Joel in Cape Town, South Africa. He's a planner and architect, got his master's in planning in the US. Went back to South Africa to make a difference after apartheid. He was going to help with the massive migration of people from rural areas to the cities by creating affordable housing, using his design skills and his planning skills. It didn't take him long to learn that that wasn't his objective, that that was not what was needed. He needed to listen to see what was possible and what was wanted. And he learned that the way to make sustainable development was through encouraging, making possible the learning of the vast local wisdom for solving housing issues. He became what he called, jokingly, a travel agent for the poor, to bring them together across communities and within communities to address and become the protagonists of their own change. Here are Varun and Amla Vidyarthi in India. They both graduated with well-respected professional degrees. Varun came with the idea with a sense of social purpose that he got from his spiritual and religious background in India. And it occurred to him that his technical background in engineering could be very useful to the people in the villages. And he created a finely tuned solar oven using a mirror to allow people to cook without burning wood, which was making people sick and destroying the atmosphere. He was shocked when he found that he went back later to see how they were using these things, and guess what he found? The women were delighted to have a box with a mirror on it. None of them had mirrors. And they had become the storage place for their precious items and the mirror for their daily toiletry. And he suddenly realized I hadn't listened. I didn't know what they wanted. And his turnaround was listening. And he began developing, before they were common, what were called self-help groups or borrowers' circles, women's borrowers' circles, that mobilized the women to handle their own affairs, create their own security and wealth, give them greater bargaining power vis-a-vis the males in the family, and ultimately bargaining power with the local councils. So he also learned to train change agents to empower them so as not to come in and tell these women what to do. So it was a layered process of change, greatly influenced by his own spiritual traditions. And then we have Otto, who took upon himself the goal of scaling up social change from all these wonderful isolated experiments to a global change process. And finally, a local leader in Cape Town who learned that she was capable of making change, that she was capable of being a leader, and that she could create an atmosphere of trust and acceptance, even in the face of anger and hostility. So where are these stories taking place? This is a picture of Kailicha, the shack dwellings outside of Cape Town. This is a picture of the Colonia. And by the way, all these drawings were done by the artist that worked with me on this book. About 48 drawings in the book. The Colonia outside of Rio Grande City, before street paving and water and wastewater were installed. This is a community meeting, a public open meeting in El Salvador, right when local government is being rebuilt after the Civil War. Mayors had fled or were killed. Local governance had become chaotic, and people were rebuilding it and using a participatory approach. This is one of those meetings called Cabildos Abiertos. This is one of the women's borrowers' circles or self-help groups in India. The man in the picture is not the facilitator. The man in the picture is the husband of a woman in the circle who had died. The women accepted the man into the circle. And this drawing is from Mexico, from an informal neighborhood on the very outskirts of metropolitan Mexico City. And children became pivotal in a number of our change efforts because they're such open, active, inquiring minds, and they bring the parents in. Finally, a symbol that local people came up with in the Valle de Cauca, Colombia, to recognize their unity in coming together to turn peasant farming into something productive, remunerative, and something to be proud of. So this symbol refers to cultivating peace. And The name of their organization was the Valley in Peace, shortened as Valle en Paz. So reading the stories in the book is an experiential exercise because each one has reflective questions at the end that ask you not just to understand what happened to the protagonist or what happened to the community in these stories, but how would you respond in the kinds of situations that these protagonists, these change agents faced. So it is actually an experiential learning process to go through and reflect on each of these stories. But what I want to do today is distill the essence of the learning from these stories for you to give you an idea of what the takeaways are, what the lessons are for your own practice. So picture yourself as a regenerative social practitioner and see how many of these patterns you could imagine yourself doing. So one pattern is creating a conscious relationship between self and the social field, between you and the community, you and the whole, this moving, evolving pattern of interactions. This is a shift in your self-awareness. Just realizing and letting go of your unexamined tacit assumptions, your blind spots, allows you to shift your relationship to the social field. What is that? The invisible web of the collective, the group, the community. Joel, for example, you remember Joel? He's the one who humbly recharacterized his professional role with the shack dwellers from low-income housing developer to travel agent for the poor. Pattern 2, connecting purpose and field awareness. This is clarifying and defining for yourself a sense of purpose that goes beyond your immediate objectives. This enhances your field awareness. Conversely, your field awareness gives you a greater sense of purpose. Each of the practitioners' stories that I examined found a sense of purpose that connected them to something larger than themselves, to the unfolding need of the or potential of the social field. It was that power of greater purpose that carried each of these practitioners forward and helped them discern their next steps along the way. From head to heart, this is about building relationships. It's a pattern undergirding all of these stories. It's a pattern that goes well beyond the cognitive level. It goes to the affective and the intuitive level. Some call this the heart wisdom. So connecting with heart wisdom engages you not as a technician or a specialist, but as a whole person in relationship. This is what builds trust with the community when they see that you're being real. It infuses the whole group with warmth and acceptance and respect. So, for example, when the 24 facilitators in peri-urban Mexico let go of fixing and became open and vulnerable about their uncertainty, the community members immediately let go of their own distancing and their mistrust. Oops. From heart to soul. How do you get to the soul level? Again, it's not the cognitive dimension. It's something deeper. And this is where the arts come in. The arts are the perfect medium for getting beyond the head to the heart and the soul. Arts awaken a spirit-filled connection that can go far deeper than dialogue. So we see the singing, the dancing, the poetry, the theater, the painting, the weaving, the drawing, the sculpting. The arts played a role in every story I examined. For celebrating their achievements, for connecting to sources of inspiration and meaning, for bringing people together, for resolving tension, for creating breakthroughs, new ways of seeing things. In embattled rural Colombia, Nancy recounts a pivotal breakthrough in building solidarity when the three separate ethnic groups of peasant farmers, the indigenous, the Afro-Colombians, and the Spanish colonial legacy, when they beheld a hand-woven image that merged the colors and symbols of all three groups, something shifted in their social field, and they began to work together. Starting from where people are, this is what you do as a regenerative social practitioner when you start. You start by embedding, observing, listening. That is what the change makers in these stories learn to do in order to understand the values and aspirations of the community. You want to find the road on which they are traveling and join them there. At that point in their journey where they are. In rural India, Varun discovered that the first responsibility of the facilitator is to immerse yourself in the mindset and the values and the situation of that community. That's what David learned in the colonia, when he found out their primary values were safety and upward mobility. Create fertile spaces. Regenerative practitioners are process leaders. This is huge, this is important. What does it mean to be a process leader? Process leaders create new spaces for dialogue, for learning from each other, for planning, deciding, and working together. They create spaces for serendipity to unfold rather than reenacting entrenched patterns. Process leadership is perhaps the most pivotal contribution of a regenerative practitioner. The cases in the book illustrate the benefits of these new spaces that the practitioners created. The transformation from separation to connectedness, caring and solidarity, new tools for addressing conflicts, finding voice and exercising leadership. Process leaders create a safe, energized container for new thinking and new relationships to emerge. Keep that in mind. The process leader, they make the social field visible and palpable, and that allows the affinity to grow. The next one is letting go. And that's so hard to do. We struggle and try to hang on and make things happen. But letting go is one of the big ones. It means emptying ourselves of our attachments and allowing. It's about allowing yourself to become the instrument of change, the vehicle through which change happens. This is not the driver of the change, nor the micromanager of the change, but the vehicle of change. You create the spaces for change and you let go of the results. This pattern is about holding agendas loosely, embracing natural rhythms, embracing flow, while always staying attuned to purpose. It's about allowing the boundaries between you and the social field to dissolve. So right after letting go, I say, hold the tension. Can you stay grounded on the generative edge of chaos? Can you bring together people with conflicting interests, views, and life experiences and find a galvanizing sense of shared purpose? One of the powerful patterns that a regenerative practitioner learns to work with is the creative tension between opposites. Harnessing that tension as a source of energy for forward movement, as a source of creativity, transforming that tension into a higher synthesis. This is Nancy bringing together the Afro-Colombian, mestizo, and indigenous farmers to find their shared connection with the land was stronger than the prejudices that divided them. This was Varun and Amla saying, why not, to the village women who had never approached the village council to speak up. Why not? This is Senora Lupe on the outskirts of Mexico City, walking the 2 long blocks to invite her rival, Tomas, to join in. Effective process leaders know the social technologies for community engagement and when to use them, but that is not enough. The rest is called the mística. This is the subtle aspect. This is the inner work. This is being strong like a mountain and spacious like the air. This is like Lao Tzu's advice. To be centered in the face of conflict and emotion, to connect with the other's humanity without judgment or defensiveness, and to be aware of the invisible energy field of the whole. This is the mística. I found in Latin America, doing my work, that community engagement people send around a poem that is very meaningful to them. It is a translation in Spanish of Lao Tzu's poem. And the last is, second to the last, what to do with judgment, cynicism, and fear. It's there. You'll experience it. What do you do with it? Do you let it close the mind and the heart, blinding your ability to see beyond your own mental model? For the regenerative facilitator, self-awareness, self-observation is essential to catch that voice of judgment, that voice of cynicism, or that voice of fear before it causes harm, before it affects the group field. And I share some accounts of my own in those stories of learning that the hard way. Equally important is your ability to discern and acknowledge those feelings in the group before they escalate. So it's your role as a facilitator to listen beneath the positions that people espouse and listen to the needs and the values and the feelings behind the words. As individuals hear each other's stories being received in an empathetic way, you as the facilitator can shift the group field toward greater connectivity and openness. That's what Charlotte did in Kailicha. And finally, creating agile structures. Design organizational structures that undergird, sustain, and foster these dynamic community processes. You do not want to stifle the social transformation and innovations. You don't want old structures with new participatory elements to them either. You want agile structures. You want fluid, dynamic, generative structures that thrive in complexity, foster emergent change, spark innovation and spontaneity. Agile structures are alive, adaptive, and generative. Agile structures are patient. They are aware that transformative change takes time. These 10 patterns taken together form the scaffolding of regenerative social practice. They are the patterns that bring aliveness, wisdom, and grace to regenerative practice. They are applicable at multiple scales and in diverse contexts. They are interactive and reinforcing, such that you may begin with any one pattern. However, you can only test them or prove them by practicing them. To conclude, I'm going to offer my personal credo for regenerative practice. A personal credo is an aspirational statement that serves you, the practitioner, as a guidepost. It's a set of intentions. It's a connection to purpose, a reminder of what you stand for. Remembering this credo helps me stay true to my purpose as a regenerative practitioner. As a regenerative practitioner, I choose to focus on what is possible. I choose to see myself not as outside or against the system that I want to change, but as an interconnected part of that evolving system. I seek to respect and understand the living elements of that system. Individual and collective. Human and natural. I seek to know, understand, and connect with whatever other or enemy, internal or external, I may perceive. I seek to care about the other and the whole at whatever scale, from face-to-face to plenary, to planetary, to see our interconnection. I seek to find my own role in fostering the next evolutionary step toward health and well-being that is wanting and able to emerge. Trusting in a larger wisdom to unfold, I seek attunement to that larger wisdom, a field of resonance with the emergent, and a dialogic presence with my co-creative collaborators. I am vigilant in my mental hygiene to let go of disempowering thoughts, cynicism, despair, and condemnation. As an agent of regenerative change, I hold my professional and personal opinions lightly as propositions to be tested, rather than positions to be defended or imposed. I develop my inner intuitive knowing, not just my rational, analytical knowing. I value and foster collaborative inquiry and choose to create spaces for such inquiry to flourish wisely through cycles of dialogue, action, reflection, and collaborative learning. I learn to hold the tension between competing views, to practice not knowing and to see the result as a fertile field of possibility. I seek to discern where my professional knowledge, my expertise, can contribute to the collective process rather than overwhelm or undermine it. As a trainer of change agents for a regenerative future, I aim to replicate and exemplify regenerative social practices in the classroom. Self-reflection, dialogue for building shared understanding, collaborative learning and inquiry, group deliberation and decision-making, and participatory action learning. I aim to facilitate a transformative learning experience. So really, I'm not a trainer at all. Rather, I create a space for your own learning, action, and reflection. The critical learning is not the mastery of the methods of participatory engagement, but rather the inner practice of the facilitator. So remember, when you go out to practice ensemble awareness, sing with your ears. Thank you. And sing with your heart.
Questions?
So, it is often the case where projects or initiatives that happen and more or less follow these steps and these notions ends up attracting more investment or whatever. Like, take the case of the 606 in Chicago, where it was a community-based initiative to create this public space on an old rail line, and eventually, as soon as the project got approved, prices and investments started growing in the area, and the community who actually organized itself to create that space eventually got displaced. So I'm asking if there's any measures that some of these practitioners have taken to avoid these type of problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what this whole approach is about. You avoid that problem by working with the community on their issues. Hey, Tom, don't leave without saying hi. I didn't recognize you right at first. Okay, thanks for coming. Another former student. And that is a pattern that happens so many times when there's some official program. I don't know what the 606 program is, but just the name of it sounds very official. And somebody brought it to the community, and they were not looking at it from a systems perspective. They were not engaging with what they weren't listening to the community or engaging the community to figure out what it wanted, and for the community to learn and learn in their own way and make changes in their own way. They were bringing something to the outside. This is going to fix you guys, but without looking at the ramifications. So it's that is our traditional recipe. It's a process for disaster. And that's why this regenerative practice is so important.
I mean, the interesting thing about this one is that it actually was a community, like a grassroots initiative. The community organized themselves, they did referendums, they voted, they actually got the city and nonprofits to take part in this and actually do what they wanted. But apparently there was like a missing part of the plan that avoided what ended up happening, which was the investment grew anyway because it was such a successful project for the community, and they just couldn't use it anyway, even if it was like I said, a very, very grassroots, creative idea.
Yeah, it's a learning process, and sometimes the learning is painful. Yes.
So I have a practical question. The types of processes that you described seem like they would take a lot of time and energy and effort day after day, week after week, month after month. potentially. But a lot of the processes that we're dealing with, these kind of typical processes around like a transportation project or some kind of community redevelopment initiative, the public engagement processes there are really rather limited, right? Like if we have one public meeting or two public meetings or something like this, like what, for a practitioner who's working within that context, what can they take away from your stories? And apply them in situations that are much more limited, and they're kind of constrained in terms of what they can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you described is the way we typically conceive of participatory planning. You know, coming with a project in mind or a program and having a few public meetings to gather input on it. And then we wonder why the public doesn't love us. And so where are the spaces for change? Part of those spaces are in the very office where you work, in the very department where you work. You can be that change maker who does the active listening. You can be the change maker who creates staff meetings that exemplify that collective generativity. And similarly, in your outreach meetings, in your community engagement meetings that you're allowed to do, make it known that you need to do your stakeholder analysis, if you want to call it that, first. So you go out and you talk to community leaders, you talk to community members, you find out what's what. And then you can come back and say, you know, it would be a real mistake if we did this meeting now in this way. And if we want this program to be successful, we need to slow down a bit. Be brave and speak up. Those spaces are there. You've got to find them and use them. Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.